As to the specific national individuality of the Russian language, it did not suffer in the slightest, because the Russian language preserved its grammatical system and basic word stock and continued to advance and perfect itself in accordance with its inherent laws of development. There can be no doubt that the crossing theory has little or no value for Soviet linguistics. If it is true that the chief task of linguistics is to study the inherent laws of language development, it has to be admitted that the crossing theory does not even set itself this task, let alone accomplish it. It simply does not notice it, or does not understand it. Question: did Pravda act rightly in starting an open discussion on problems of linguistics? Answer: yes, it did. Along what lines the problems of linguistics will be settled will become clear at the conclusion of the discussion. But it may be said already that the discussion has been very useful. It has brought out, in the first place, that in linguistic bodies both in the center and in the republics a regime has prevailed which is alien to science and men of science. The slightest criticism of the state of affairs in Soviet linguistics, even the most timid attempt to criticize the so-called new doctrine in linguistics, was persecuted and suppressed by the leading linguistic circles. Valuable workers and researchers in linguistics were dismissed from their posts or demoted for being critical of Marr's heritage or expressing the slightest disapproval of his teachings. Linguistic scholars were appointed to leading posts not on their merits, but because of their unqualified acceptance of Marr's theories. It is generally recognized that no science can develop and flourish without a battle of opinions, without freedom of criticism. But this generally recognized rule was ignored and flouted in the most unceremonious fashion. There arose a close group of infallible leaders, who, having secured themselves against any possible criticism, became a law unto themselves and did whatever they pleased. To give one example, the so-called Baku course, which the author himself had rejected and forbidden to be republished, was republished nevertheless by order of this leading caste. Comrade Stalin calls them disciples of Marr and included without any reservations in the list of textbooks recommended to students. This means that the students were deceived, the rejected course being suggested to them as a sound textbook. If I were not convinced of the integrity of Comrade Stalin and the other linguistic leaders, I would say that such conduct is tantamount to sabotage. How could this have happened? It happened because the Arakshayev regime established in linguistics cultivates irresponsibility and encourages such arbitrary actions. The discussion has proved to be very useful first of all because it brought this Arakshayev regime into the light of day and smashed it to smithereens. But the usefulness of the discussion does not end there. It not only smashed the old regime in linguistics, but also brought out the incredible confusion of ideas on cardinal questions of linguistics which prevails among the leading circles in this branch of science. Until the discussion began, the disciples of Marr kept silence and glossed over the unsatisfactory state of affairs in linguistics. But when the discussion started, silence became impossible, and they were compelled to express their opinion in the press. And what did we find? It turned out that in Marr's teachings there are a whole number of defects, errors, ill-defined problems and sketchy propositions. Why, one asks, have N.Y. Marr's disciples begun to talk about this only now, after the discussion opened? Why did they not see to it before? Why did they not speak about it in due time openly and honestly, as befits scientists? Having admitted some errors of N.Y. Marr, his disciples, it appears, think that Soviet linguistics can only be advanced on the basis of a rectified version of N.Y. Marr's theory, which they consider a Marxist one. No, save us from N.Y. Marr's Marxism. N.Y. Marr did indeed want to be, and endeavored to be, a Marxist, but he failed to become one. He was nothing but a simplifier and vulgarizer of Marxism, similar to the prolet-cultists or the rapists. N.Y. Marr introduced into linguistics the incorrect, non-Marxist formula that language is a superstructure, and got himself into a muddle and put linguistics into a muddle. Soviet linguistics cannot be advanced on the basis of an incorrect formula. N.Y. Marr introduced into linguistics another and also incorrect and non-Marxist formula regarding the class character of language, and got himself into a muddle and put linguistics into a muddle. Soviet linguistics cannot be advanced on the basis of an incorrect formula which is contrary to the whole course of the history of peoples and languages. N.Y. Marr introduced into linguistics an immodest, boastful, arrogant tone alien to Marxism and tending towards a bald and offhand negation of everything done in linguistics prior to N.Y. Marr. N.Y. Marr really abused the comparative historical method as idealistic. Yet it must be said that, despite its serious shortcomings, the comparative historical method is nevertheless better than N.Y. Marr's really idealistic four-element analysis, because the former gives a stimulus to work, to a study of languages, while the latter only gives a stimulus to loll in one's armchair and tell fortunes in the teacup of the celebrated four elements. N.Y. Marr haughtily discountenanced every attempt to study groups of languages on the grounds that it was a manifestation of the Proto-Language Theory. Yet it cannot be denied that the linguistic affinity of nations like the Slav nations, say, is beyond question, and that a study of the linguistic affinity of these nations might be of great value to linguistics in the study of the laws of language development. The Proto-Language Theory, I need hardly say, has nothing to do with it. To listen to N.Y. Marr, and especially to his disciples, one might think that prior to N.Y. Marr there was no such thing as the science of language, that the science of language appeared with the new doctrine of N.Y. Marr. Marx and Engels were much more modest. They held that the dialectical materialism was a product of the development of the sciences, including philosophy, in earlier periods. Thus, the discussion was useful also because it brought to light ideological shortcomings in Soviet linguistics. I think that the sooner our linguistics rids itself of N.Y. Marr's errors, the sooner will it be possible to extricate it from its present crisis. Elimination of the Arakshayev regime in linguistics, rejection of N.Y. Marr's errors, and the introduction of Marxism into linguistics, that, in my opinion, is the way in which Soviet linguistics could be put on a sound basis. Pravda, June 20, 1950. Concerning certain problems of linguistics, reply to Comrade Krashenikova. Comrade Krashenikova. I am answering your questions. Question: your article convincingly shows that language is neither the base nor the superstructure. Would it be right to regard language as a phenomenon characteristic of both the base and the superstructure, or would it be more correct to regard language as an intermediate phenomenon? Answer: of course, characteristic of language, as a social phenomenon, is that common feature which is inherent in all social phenomena, including the base and the superstructure, namely, it serves society just as society is served by all other social phenomena, including the base and the superstructure. But this, properly speaking, exhausts that common feature which is inherent in all social phenomena. Beyond this, important distinctions begin between social phenomena. The point is that social phenomena have, in addition to this common feature, their own specific features which distinguish them from each other and which are of primary importance for science. The specific features of the base consist in that it serves society economically. The specific features of the superstructure consist in that it serves society by means of political, legal, aesthetic and other ideas and provides society with corresponding political, legal and other institutions. What then are the specific features of language, distinguishing it from other social phenomena? They consist in that language serves society as a means of intercourse between people, as a means for exchanging thoughts in society, as a means enabling people to understand one another and to coordinate joint work in all spheres of human activity, both in the sphere of production and in the sphere of economic relations, both in the sphere of politics and in the sphere of culture, both in social life and in everyday life. These specific features are characteristic only of language, and precisely because they are characteristic only of language, language is the object of study by an independent science, linguistics. If there were no such specific features of language, linguistics would lose its right to independent existence. In brief, language cannot be included either in the category of bases or in the category of superstructures. Nor can it be included in the category of intermediate phenomena between the base and the superstructure, for such intermediate phenomena do not exist. But perhaps language could be included in the category of the productive forces of society, in the category, say, of instruments of production. Indeed, there does exist a certain analogy between language and instruments of production. Instruments of production manifest, just as language does, a kind of indifference towards classes, and can serve equally different classes of society, both old and new. Does this circumstance provide ground for including language in the category of instruments of production? No, it does not. At one time, Marr, seeing that his formula, language is a superstructure on the base, encountered objections, decided to reshape it and announced that language is an instrument of production. Was Marr right in including language in the category of instruments of production? No, he certainly was not. The point is that the similarity between language and instruments of production ends with the analogy I have just mentioned. But, on the other hand, there is a radical difference between language and instruments of production. This difference lies in the fact that whereas instruments of production produce material wealth, language produces nothing or produces words only. To put it more plainly, People possessing instruments of production can produce material wealth, but those very same people, if they possess a language but not instruments of production, cannot produce material wealth. It is not difficult to see that were language capable of producing material wealth, windbags would be the richest men on earth. Question. Marx and Engels define language as the immediate reality of thought, as practical, actual consciousness. Ideas, Marx says, do not exist divorced from language. In what measure, in your opinion, should linguistics occupy itself with the semantic aspect of language, semantics, historical semagiology, and stylistics, or should form alone be the subject of linguistics? Answer. Semantics is one of the important branches of linguistics. The semantic aspect of words and expressions is of serious importance in the study of language. Hence, semantics must be assured its due place in linguistics. However, in working on problems of semantics and in utilizing its data, its significance must in no way be overestimated, and still less must it be abused. I have in mind certain philologists who, having an excessive passion for semantics, disregard language as the immediate reality of thought inseparably connected with thinking, divorce thinking from language, and maintain that language is outliving its age and that it is possible to do without language. Listen to what Marr says. Language exists only inasmuch as it is expressed in sounds. The action of thinking occurs also without being expressed. Language has already begun to surrender its functions to the latest inventions which are unreservedly conquering space, while thinking is on the upgrade, departing from its unutilized accumulations in the past and its new acquisitions, and is to oust and fully replace language. The language of the future is thinking, which will be developing in technique free of natural matter. No language, even the spoken language, which is all the same connected with the standards of nature, will be able to withstand it. If we interpret this labor magic gibberish into simple human language, the conclusion may be drawn that Marr divorces thinking from language. Marr considers that communication between people can be realized without language, with the help of thinking itself, which is free of the natural matter of language, free of the standards of nature. Divorcing thinking from language and having freed it from the natural matter of language, Marr lands into the swamp of idealism. It is said that thoughts arise in the mind of man prior to their being expressed in speech, that they arise without linguistic material, without linguistic integument, in, so to say, a naked form. But that is absolutely wrong. Whatever thoughts arise in the human mind, and at whatever moment, they can arise and exist only on the basis of the linguistic material, on the basis of language terms and phrases. Bare thoughts, free of the linguistic material, free of the natural matter of language, do not exist. Language is the immediate reality of thought. The reality of thought is manifested in language. Only idealists can speak of thinking not being connected with the natural matter of language, of thinking without language. In brief, overestimation of semantics and abuse of it led Marr to idealism. Consequently, if semantics is safeguarded against exaggerations and abuses of the kind committed by Marr and some of his disciples, semantics can be of great benefit to linguistics. Question: you quite justly say that the ideas, concepts, customs and moral principles of the bourgeoisie and those of the proletariat are directly antithetical. The class character of these phenomena is certainly reflected in the semantic aspect of language. In analyzing concrete linguistic material and, in the first place, the semantic aspect of language, can we speak of the class essence of the concepts expressed by language, particularly in those cases when language expresses not only the thought of man, but also his attitude towards reality, where his class affinity manifests itself with especial clarity? Answer: putting it more briefly, you want to know whether classes influence language, whether they introduce into language their specific words and expressions, whether there are cases when people attach a different meaning to one and the same word or expression depending on their class affinity. Yes, classes influence language, introduce into the language their own specific words and expressions, and sometimes understand one and the same word or expression differently. There is no doubt about that. However, it does not follow that specific words and expressions, as well as difference in semantics, can be of serious importance for the development of a single language common to the whole people, that they are capable of detracting from its significance or of changing its character. Firstly, such specific words and expressions, as well as cases of difference in semantics, are so few in language that they hardly make up even 1% of the entire linguistic material. Consequently, all the remaining overwhelming mass of words and expressions, as well as their semantics, are common to all classes of society. Secondly, specific words and expressions with a class tinge are used in speech not according to rules of some sort of class grammar, which does not exist, but according to the grammatical rules of the existing language common to the whole people. Hence, the existence of specific words and expressions and the facts of differences in the semantics of language do not refute, but, on the contrary, confirm the existence and necessity of a single language common to the whole people. Question: in your article you quite correctly appraise Marr as a vulgarizer of Marxism. Does this mean that the linguists, including us, the young linguists, should reject the whole linguistic heritage of Marr, who all the same has to his credit a number of valuable linguistic researches? Approaching Marr critically, cannot we take from him what is useful and valuable? Answer: of course, the works of N.Y. Marr do not consist solely of errors. N.Y. Marr made very gross mistakes when he introduced into linguistics elements of Marxism in a distorted form, when he tried to create an independent theory of language. But N.Y. Marr has certain good and ably written works, in which he, forgetting his theoretical claims, conscientiously and, one must say, skillfully investigates individual languages. In these works one can find not a little that is valuable and instructive. Clearly, these valuable and instructive things should be taken from N.Y. Marr and utilized. Question: many linguists consider formalism one of the main causes of the stagnation in Soviet linguistics. We should very much like to know your opinion as to what formalism in linguistics consists in and how it should be overcome. Answer: N.Y. Marr and his disciples accuse of formalism all linguists who do not accept the new doctrine of N.Y. Marr. This, of course, is not serious or clever. N.Y. Marr considered that grammar is an empty formality, and that people who regard the grammatical system as the foundation of language are formalists. This is altogether foolish. I think that formalism was invented by the authors of the new doctrine to facilitate their struggle against their opponents in linguistics. The cause of the stagnation in Soviet linguistics is not the formalism invented by N.Y. Marr and his disciples, but the Arakshayev regime and the theoretical gaps in linguistics. The Arakshayev regime was set up by the disciples of N.Y. Marr. Theoretical confusion was brought into linguistics by N.Y. Marr and his closest colleagues. To put an end to stagnation, both the one and the other must be eliminated. The removal of these plague spots will put Soviet linguistics on a sound basis, will lead it out onto the broad highway and enable Soviet linguistics to occupy first place in world linguistics. Pravda, July 4, 1950. Concerning certain problems of linguistics, June 29, 1950. Replied to Comrade Stalin. Esteemed Comrade Stalin, I am replying to your letter with considerable delay, for it was only yesterday forwarded to me from the apparatus of the Central Committee. Your interpretation of my standpoint on the question of dialects is absolutely correct. Class dialects, which it would be more correct to call jargons, do not serve the mass of the people, but the narrow social upper crust. Moreover, they do not have a grammatical system or basic word stock of their own. In view of this, they cannot possibly develop into independent languages. Local dialects, on the other hand, serve the mass of the people and have a grammatical system and basic word stock of their own. In view of this, some local dialects, in the process of formation of nations, may become the basis of national languages and develop into independent national languages. This was the case, for instance, with the Koskoral dialect of the Russian language, which formed the basis of the Russian national language. The same must be said of the Poltava-Kiev dialect of the Ukrainian language, which formed the basis of the Ukrainian national language. As for the other dialects of such languages, they lose their originality, merge with those languages and disappear in them. Reverse processes also occur when the single language of a nationality, which has not yet become a nation owing to the absence of the necessary economic conditions of development, collapses as a result of the disintegration of the state of that nationality, and the local dialects, which have not yet had time to be fully uniformized in the single language, revive and give rise to the formation of separate independent languages. Possibly, this was the case, for example, with the single Mongolian language. Pravda, August 2, 1950. Concerning certain problems of linguistics to Comrades D. Belkin and S. Führer, July 11, 1950. I have received your letters. Your mistake is that you have confused two different things and substituted another subject for that examined in my reply to Comrade Krashenikova. In that reply I criticized N.Y. Marr, who, dealing with language and thought, divorces language from thought and thus lapses into idealism. Therefore, I referred in my reply to normal human beings possessing the faculty of speech. I maintained, moreover, that with such human beings thoughts can arise only on the basis of linguistic material, that bare thoughts unconnected with linguistic material do not exist among people who possess the faculty of speech. Instead of accepting or rejecting this thesis, you introduce anomalous human beings, people without language, deaf mutes, who have no language at their disposal and whose thoughts, of course, cannot arise on the basis of linguistic material. As you see, this is an entirely different subject which I did not touch upon and could not have touched upon, since linguistics concerns itself with normal human beings possessing the faculty of speech and not with anomalous deaf mutes who do not possess the faculty of speech. You have substituted for the subject under discussion another subject that was not discussed. From Comrade Belkin's letter it is evident that he places on a par the language of words and gesture language. He seems to think that gesture language and the language of words are of equal significance, that at one time human society had no language of words, that hand language at that time played the part of the language of words which appeared later. But if Comrade Belkin really thinks so, he is committing a serious error. Spoken language or the language of words has always been the sole language of human society capable of serving as an adequate means of intercourse between people. History does not know of a single human society, be it the most backward, that did not have its own spoken language. Ethnography does not know of a single backward tribe, be it as primitive or even more primitive than, say, the Australians or the Tierra del Fuegans of the last century, which did not have its own spoken language. In the history of mankind, spoken language has been one of the forces which helped human beings to emerge from the animal world, unite into communities, develop their faculty of thinking, organize social production, wage a successful struggle against the forces of nature, and attain the stage of progress we have today. In this respect, the significance of the so-called gesture language, in view of its extreme poverty and limitations, is negligible. Properly speaking, this is not a language, and not even a linguistic substitute that could in one way or another replace spoken language, but an auxiliary means of extremely limited possibilities to which man sometimes resorts to emphasize this at that point in his speech. Gesture language and spoken language are just as incomparable as are the primitive wooden hoe and the modern caterpillar tractor with its 5-furrow plough or tractor row drill. Apparently, you are primarily interested in the deaf mutes, and only secondarily in problems of linguistics. Evidently, it was precisely this circumstance that prompted you to put a number of questions to me. Well, if you insist, I am not averse to granting your request. How do matters stand with regard to deaf mutes? Do they possess the faculty of thinking? Do thoughts arise with them? Yes, they possess the faculty of thinking and thoughts arise with them. Clearly, since deaf mutes are deprived of the faculty of speech, their thoughts cannot arise on the basis of linguistic material. Can this be taken to mean that the thoughts of deaf mutes are naked, are not connected with the standards of nature, N.Y. Marr's expression? No, it cannot. The thoughts of deaf mutes arise and can exist only on the basis of the images, sensations and conceptions they form in everyday life on the objects of the outside world and their relations among themselves, thanks to the senses of sight, of touch, taste, and smell. Apart from these images, sensations and conceptions, thought is empty, is deprived of all content, that is, it does not exist. To Comrade Stalin. July the 28th, 1950. I have received your letter. Pressure of work has somewhat delayed my reply. Your letter tacitly proceeds from two premises. From the premise that it is permissible to quote the work of this or that author apart from the historical period of which the quotation treats, and secondly, from the premise that this or that conclusion or formula of Marxism, derived as a result of studying one of the periods of historical development, holds good for all periods of development and therefore must remain invariable. I must say that both these premises are deeply mistaken. A few examples. In the 40s of the past century, when there was no monopoly capitalism as yet, when capitalism was developing more or less smoothly along an ascending line, spreading to new territories it had not yet occupied, and the law of uneven development could not yet fully operate, Marx and Engels concluded that a socialist revolution could not be victorious in one particular country, that it could be victorious only as a result of a joint blow in all, or in most, civilized countries. This conclusion subsequently became a guiding principle for all Marxists. However, at the beginning of the 20th century, especially in the period of the First World War, when it became clear to everyone that pre-monopoly capitalism had definitely developed into monopoly capitalism, when rising capitalism had become dying capitalism, when the war had revealed the incurable weaknesses of the world imperialist front, and the law of uneven development predetermined that the proletarian revolution would mature in different countries at different times, Lenin, proceeding from Marxist theory, came to the conclusion that in the new conditions of development, the socialist revolution could fully prove victorious in one country taken separately, that the simultaneous victory of the socialist revolution in all countries, or in a majority of civilized countries, was impossible owing to the uneven maturing of the revolution in those countries, that the old formula of Marx and Engels no longer corresponded to the new historical conditions. It is evident that here we have two different conclusions on the question of the victory of socialism, which not only contradict, but exclude each other. Some textualists and Talmudists who quote mechanically without delving into the essence of the matter, and apart from historical conditions, may say that one of these conclusions should be discarded as being absolutely incorrect, while the other conclusion, as the absolutely correct one, should be applied to all periods of development. Marxists, however, cannot but know that the textualists and Talmudists are mistaken. They cannot but know that both of these conclusions are correct, though not absolutely, each being correct for its own time, Marx's and Engels' conclusion, for the period of pre-monopoly capitalism, and Lenin's conclusion, for the period of monopoly capitalism. Engels in his Anti-Düring said that after the victory of the socialist revolution, the state is bound to wither away. On these grounds, after the victory of the socialist revolution in our country, textualists and Talmudists in our party began demanding that the party should take steps to ensure the speedy withering away of our state, to disband state organs, to give up a standing army. However, The study of the world situation of our time led Soviet Marxists to the conclusion that in the conditions of capitalist encirclement, when the socialist revolution has been victorious only in one country, and capitalism reigns in all other countries, the land of the victorious revolution should not weaken, but in every way strengthen its state organs, intelligence organs and army, if that land does not want to be crushed by the capitalist encirclement. Russian Marxists came to the conclusion that Engels' formula has in view the victory of socialism in all, or in most, countries, that it cannot be applied in the case where socialism is victorious in one country taken separately and capitalism reigns in all the other countries. Evidently, we have here two different formulas regarding the destiny of the socialist state, each formula excluding the other. The textualists and Talmudists may say that this circumstance creates an intolerable situation, that one of these formulas must be discarded as being absolutely erroneous, and the other, as the absolutely correct one, must be applied to all periods of development of the socialist state. Marxists, however, cannot but know that the textualists and Talmudists are mistaken, for both these formulas are correct, though not absolutely, each being correct for its time, the formula of Soviet Marxists, for the period of the victory of socialism in one or several countries, and the formula of Engels, for the period when the consecutive victory of socialism in separate countries will lead to the victory of socialism in the majority of countries, and when the necessary conditions will thus have been created for the application of Engels' formula. The number of such examples could be multiplied. The same must be said of the two different formulas on the question of language, taken from various works of Stalin and cited by Comrade Kholopov in his letter. Comrade Kholopov refers to Stalin's work concerning Marxism and linguistics, where the conclusion is drawn that, as a result of the crossing, say, of two languages, one of them usually emerges victorious, while the other dies away, that, consequently, crossing does not produce some new, third language, but preserves one of the languages. He refers further to another conclusion, taken from Stalin's report to the 16th Congress of the CPSU, where it is said that in the period of the victory of socialism on a world scale, when socialism is consolidated and becomes part of everyday life, national languages will inevitably merge into one common language which, of course, will be neither Great Russian nor German, but something new. Comparing these two formulas and seeing that, far from coinciding, they exclude each other, Comrade Kholopov falls into despair. From your article, he writes in his letter, I understood that the crossing of languages can never produce some new language, whereas prior to your article I was firmly convinced, in conformity with your speech at the 16th Congress of the CPSU, that under communism, languages would merge into one common language. Evidently, having discovered a contradiction between these two formulas and being deeply convinced that the contradiction must be removed, Comrade Kholopov considers it necessary to get rid of one of these formulas as incorrect and to clutch at the other as being correct for all periods and countries. But which formula to clutch at, he does not know. The result is something in the nature of a hopeless situation. Comrade Kholopov does not even suspect that both formulas can be correct, each for its own time. That is always the case with textualists and Talmudists who do not delve into the essence of the matter, quote mechanically and irrespective of the historical conditions of which the quotations treat, and invariably find themselves in a hopeless situation. Yet if one examines the essence of the matter, there are no grounds for considering the situation hopeless. The fact is that Stalin's pamphlet concerning Marxism and linguistics, and Stalin's speech at the 16th Party Congress, refer to two entirely different epochs, owing to which the formulas, too, prove to be different. The formula given by Stalin in his pamphlet, in the part where it speaks of the crossing of languages, refers to the epoch prior to the victory of socialism on a world scale, when the exploiting classes are the dominant power in the world, when national and colonial oppression remains in force, when national isolation and mutual distrust among nations are consolidated by differences between states, when, as yet there is no national equality of rights, when the crossing of languages takes place as a struggle for the domination of one of the languages, when the conditions necessary for the peaceful and friendly cooperation of nations and languages are as yet lacking, when it is not the cooperation and mutual enrichment of languages that are on the order of the day, but the assimilation of some and the victory of other languages. It is clear that in such conditions there can be only victorious and defeated languages. It is precisely these conditions that Stalin's formula has in view when it says that the crossing, say, of two languages results not in the formation of a new language, but in the victory of one of the languages and the defeat of the other. As regards the other formula by Stalin, taken from his speech at the 16th Party Congress, in the part that touches on the merging of languages into one common language, it has in view another epoch, namely, the epoch after the victory of socialism on a world scale, when world imperialism no longer exists, when the exploiting classes are overthrown and national and colonial oppression is eradicated, when national isolation and mutual distrust among nations is replaced by mutual confidence and rapprochement between nations, when national equality has been put into practice, when the policy of suppressing and assimilating languages is abolished, when the cooperation of nations has been established, and it is possible for national languages freely to enrich one another through their cooperation. It is clear that in these conditions there can be no question of the suppression and defeat of some languages and the victory of others. Here we shall have not two languages, one of which is to suffer defeat, while the other is to emerge from the struggle victorious, but hundreds of national languages, out of which, as a result of a prolonged economic, political and cultural cooperation of nations, there will first appear most enriched unified zonal languages, and subsequently the zonal languages will merge into a single international language, which, of course, will be neither German, nor Russian, nor English, but a new language that has absorbed the best elements of the national and zonal languages. Consequently, the two different formulas correspond to two different epochs in the development of society, and precisely because they correspond to them, both formulas are correct, each for its epoch. To demand that these formulas should not be at variance with each other, that they should not exclude each other, is just as absurd as it would be to demand that the epoch of the domination of capitalism should not be at variance with the epoch of the domination of socialism, that socialism and capitalism should not exclude each other. The textualists and Talmudists regard Marxism and separate conclusions and formulas of Marxism as a collection of dogmas which never change, notwithstanding changes in the conditions of the development of society. They believe that if they learn these conclusions and formulas by heart and start citing them at random, they will be able to solve any problem, reckoning that the memorized conclusions and formulas will serve them for all times and countries, for all occasions in life. But this can be the conviction only of people who see the letter of Marxism, but not its essence, who learn by rote the texts of conclusions and formulas of Marxism, but do not understand their meaning. Marxism is the science of the laws governing the development of nature and society, the science of the revolution of the oppressed and exploited masses, the science of the victory of socialism in all countries, the science of building communist society. As a science, Marxism cannot stand still, it develops and is perfected. In its development, Marxism cannot but be enriched by new experience, new knowledge. Consequently, some of its formulas and conclusions cannot but change in the course of time, cannot but be replaced by new formulas and conclusions, corresponding to the new historical tasks. Marxism does not recognize invariable conclusions and formulas, obligatory for all epochs and periods. Marxism is the enemy of all dogmatism.